It's definitely been fucked with, and that's very true. Like, people have been trying to discredit this for a long time, but it's very difficult because based on Dee's reputation and the history of Dee. I mean, he was a hugely important historical figure. So it's very hard for them to just toss it, but at the same time, no one wants to talk about it. I actually find this hilarious with the whole Enochian thing to begin with, because, you know, Hollywood loves to get their hands on anything that's a little bit out there, a little bit crazy. This should be gold for them. It should be, but they would never touch it because in a million years.
It's too weird, too out there, too real.
Yeah. It's too close to what's actually going on. And the question then becomes, if we take it at face value, the angels wanted to transmit the Enochian system to generate knowledge, to create something like Aleister Crowley, to produce maybe a work like 418. This would have to be the intention, right? So if they intended that, and this was their plan all along, there's one point in Confessions where Crowley explicitly says that Dee and Kelly essentially, I don't remember, I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote. It was, how do they say? Basically, he says that it was before its time. They ripped this fruit of knowledge.
Wrestled from the arms of the angels.
Yeah, it was supposed to he explicitly states that it prefigures the new Aeon, essentially. But it was a little too early for that to actually work, or for that to come to fruition at that point in time. But what this leads into with 418 and later with the Book of Thoth is a sort of new or revolutionary morality, which you only get glimpses of in True and Faithful, and you only get glimpses of in the 5 books of history. And it's very confusing for Dee because he has no idea what's going on in certain periods, just because he's getting contradictory information from all kinds of different sources. Whereas Crowley, say what you will about his communications, he got pretty consistent ideas from Aiwass and pretty consistent ideas from the entities that he was talking about, which would actually be logical if you take at face value the idea that Dee and Kelly were operating around the end of an era and Crowley was operating around the beginning of a new magical era. It would be completely logical to assume that. And I think it's easy to miss these very simple things, very natural things to expect, just because we're not accustomed to the idea of thinking of these things in terms of aeons. I mean, these are terms that get thrown around in the occult community, but I don't know how much people actually invest in them or how seriously people actually take them. So it's completely logical to make that assumption based on that idea of progression. And if that is logical, then it brings us back to the whole idea of the apocalypse and Crowley as the beast, which also brings us back to the idea of the second coming. If there's a beast, there's a second coming. One thing has to lead to the other. You can't take just a little part of that story and run with it. You've got to have the whole story. And then where does that leave us? That's an interesting question. I think that Dee and Kelly, and one of the big things, I guess, go into something that Donald Tyson touches on. I'm trying not to do that here today. So you all should read his book, and if you haven't, and anything he's said, there's no reason for me to reiterate, because he does say things. I actually usually hate recommending beginner books. I don't usually recommend beginner books, but his beginner book, Enochian Magic for Beginners, is actually pretty good and it's worth reading. But I mean, it's clear at one point that the angels really want Dee and Kelly to initiate this apocalypse, or what Tyson basically theorizes what he calls the apocalypse working. He kind of feels like this is what the whole system's building towards, is an actual, like, opening all these keys, unlocking all these doors, opening all these gates, and making the final whatever. Because no one really knows what the final answer to that question is. No one really knows what's going to happen. And we can run away from that. I hesitate to frame things too much in metaphorical terms. Although I don't really believe that dragons are going to come out of the sky and manticores and scorpion-tailed bugs and shit like that. Probably not. At the same time, I think that people like to hide behind metaphors and hide from uncomfortable possibilities behind the idea that it's all just a big story. So, again, balancing act. Find a medium in between the two. But there's no record of what Dee and Kelly might have done to actually put this stuff to work. We don't really know how they used this system. We know how they got this system. We have that, but we don't have what they actually did with it. And I think it's completely naive to assume that they would have got this whole system of magic and never tried to work it. Really? Like, after everything that they did and all the work they put in, they must have tried something. We just don't have a record of it. Which is one of the unfortunate tragedies of this whole situation. What we do have is what Crowley came up with, and I don't know, did I? No, I didn't really touch on this. I think that I've talked about this before, but I mean, it's very significant to realize Crowley came up with the Book of the Law in response to his attempt to do the Abramelin operation to get in touch with his holy guardian angel at the grade in the Golden Dawn when you start to learn about Enochian magic. The 5 = 6 in the Golden Dawn is when that idea sort of gets introduced. And no, I mean, you know, you probably should know about it before then or whatever, but that's where explicitly we start, okay, now you're looking at Enochian stuff. For that to happen at the same time as he starts getting all this Book of Revelation stuff that you see in the Book of the Law, where there's, at some points, there's like literally like direct quotes from that book, which is not surprising because Crowley knew the Bible very well. That's significant when you look at what the Enochian system is supposed to be doing, and what the angels say, at least, that it's supposed to be doing, and what they tell Dee and Kelly it's supposed to be doing. They're trying to manifest the apocalypse. Well, here's a guy all of a sudden who comes along who seems to be able to do this better than anyone before or after. I mean, there is really no one, I mean, not to suck Crowley's dick too much, but there's no one in history who's ever done anything that's even remotely comparable. And no one in occult history. It's, and everyone, people get so upset. It's like, oh, let's not be Crowleyites. Let's not go into Crowleyanity. It's like, you know what? You still have to sit back and recognize the fact that he is peerless. There is no one who's ever done anything that you could even put beside that. I mean, Dee and Kelly, arguably some of the best magicians ever. What do we have? We have a small picture of an imperfect record of a not ratified system, not comprehensible really unless you pick your way through it and like drag out the little pieces. You get Agrippa. Well, some of Agrippa's science, some of its mysticism. He doesn't really have like a good philosophical background for his theories. He doesn't really explain certain things. In some cases he's just rehashing stuff that he's been told. You get Levy. In some cases, he's just talking out the fuck of his ass. And if you've ever read History of Magic, it's armchair historian stuff where he doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's trying to tell stories about other crap and pretending that it's real history and so on and so forth. And he'll cop to that, but at the same time, Crowley's the only one who will say, this is exactly what's going on, this is what I did, here's what I mean, and here's what I base it on. Clear, concise, out there, and if he does talk about mystical experiences, he downplays everything he can possibly downplay. The guy would take the crab at a crab soup, for Christ's sake. Like, seriously. And, yeah, you don't really find that very much in this whole thing. So, I think that's why it's tremendously significant that he would come up with something as